Welcome back to the Nancy Levin Show, and you are in for a treat today. I am bringing you Sara Surani. She is an activist, entrepreneur, educator, researcher, and co-founder of She is the Universe, a global movement for girls' empowerment. She has lived and worked all over the world, bridging storytelling with gender equity, health advocacy, and education. From fishing towns in Tanzania to the depths of the Amazon jungle. Sara works with community empowerment and entrepreneurship globally, collaborating with grassroots and governments across the US, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. She believes that stories move people and have the power to change the world. A daughter of Pakistani Muslim immigrants in South Texas, Sara holds degrees from Harvard University, Tsinghua University. She is a Fulbright Fellow and a Schwarzman Scholar, and is always looking for an excuse to learn a new language. Sara is also the author of the brand new book, Songs of My Grandmother, her debut poetry and prose collection. So I had the great fortune of meeting Sara and mentoring her in Hay House's Diverse Wisdom Initiative. And I'm also incredibly grateful that I had an early exposure to Sara's writing, her process, and this manuscript that became Songs of My Grandmother, on finding ourselves, each other, and the things that make us come alive. This is a magnificent book. And in fact, I'm also incredibly honored that my own endorsement of Sara's work is on the back cover of her book. And so I said, Songs of My Grandmother is a lyrical invitation to embrace the fullness of our humanity. Sara explores the sacred dance between grief and joy, belonging and loss. With every page, she tenderly holds our hands and guides us through the complexities of identity, showing us how the stories of our ancestors shape the very essence of who we are, a testament to the resilience of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Prepare to be moved, inspired, and transformed. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to see you again as well.
I'm so happy to see you. I feel like I got a front row seat to this whole experience for you. And I love seeing the final book, knowing everything that we even began exploring together in terms of the way that you began crafting the manuscript itself. So I would love to just begin with hearing a little bit about your experience as a first-time author and how this book came to be and how this is going for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. I feel like even like I'm still stepping into it because even the word author, when you say it, I'm like, oh my God, I'm an author. I feel like it doesn't happen until like I get the book in my hand because what if it goes away? But I think the biggest aspect, I think the whole journey is I always tell people like writing this book has been the easiest thing I've ever done. And not because it was easy. Like if you, Nancy, you've read the book, like I go into all the depths of human emotion. So it was very difficult going to those places sometimes. But it was easy because it wasn't something I wanted to do. It was something I needed to do. And like my writing process, I also like was very like tender with myself during the process. I didn't quite have like the discipline every single day, but every time the urge to write came up, I honored that above anything else. And so I felt like that by itself was a healing experience. And like, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but like Nancy, you and I, we were in this like this fellowship and with like two other incredible women. And like I felt when I applied to this writing fellowship, I was so excited. It was a dream to be able to get into writing fellowship. And then right before the first meeting, we met up in Edinburgh for the first time. And right before then, I had gotten, like a week before, I had gotten attacked on the subway in New York City. And my experience the first year of the whole fellowship, I was like experiencing PTSD, right? And how that, like, I am someone who has a lot of feelings and emotions. And the way that it most directly manifested was that I like um felt so disassociated from my emotions. And I couldn't write, right? Like the only time I wrote, like I remember every single week we would have this, every single month we have a meeting, and
Yep.
Nancy would be like, "So how is writing going?" And every single month I would show up and I would be like, nothing. I wrote nothing. Like I wrote nothing again, or like I didn't write anything again. And different people would be like developing their book proposals or book manuscripts. And every single month for like the 9 months of this fellowship, I couldn't write. And I felt so much guilt about that, about like being a writer and not being able to write, and being in a writing fellowship. And like minus like each meeting we had like a exercise you would do, a writing
Mm-hmm.
exercise.
Yep.
So I would like write during that with a prompt for that moment and try to like imagine what I would feel, but like I couldn't really write. Um, and so that imposter syndrome was there. And so when I even got the book deal, I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, how did I, like, I had written in the past and it's a collection over the years. So I was like, how am I going to write this when I haven't written? Um, and then a friend of mine was like, Sarah, like, what if you let go of this idea that you have to be a writer? And I had so much resistance in letting that go. But the day that I let that go, I started to write again. Um, and so like this, I tell people like the year of like where I couldn't write as much was like being kind of constipated. And then the year I was writing the book, I was like, it was just like diarrhea. Like it was just like came out of me. And I was like, I can't not write this. So I think like all of those, and then also like the experience of writing the book, it is divided by colors, and each color is a different emotion. And so it can be, you can read it beginning to end, or you can pick it up wherever, but the journey follows this like almost this wave of emotions. And so as I submitted chapters to my editor, I myself was following that journey that the book takes. So it like, in many ways, I wrote it for myself, or like it was like something that I needed to write and I needed to get out there.
I remember when we were in one of our conversations talking about outlines and ways to lay out the book, and you said, can I lay it out in colors? And it was amazing. I remember our conversation about that and how that really began to unlock something in you, being able to see it that way. And I so appreciate the story that you just shared, as I was not aware that that is what was happening. And really I mean, your own story of resiliency and your own story of stick with itness and trust that,
Yeah.
that the book was going to come. And, I want to say for everyone listening, I mean, you heard the bio. I mean, you are an incredibly impressive woman, not only for your accomplishments, but for who I have known you to be in this kind of a setting. And I honestly could not be happier for you having this debut collection published. And this is a really important book. This is an important book for the time we're living in right this minute. This is an important book for everyone to be exposed to, for what you expose in this book. And, ranging from cultural identity to intergenerational trauma to the life of an immigrant in the United States, the power of community, grief, resilience, the global perspective on womanhood. I could go on and on and on to why I find what you're sharing so important. And I'm curious, as we sort of start diving into the book itself, what feels the most, I would say, like, what has the most heat about your book for you right now in the climate we are living in?
Oh, I think one thing when I think a lot about this book, and it makes me so emotional because I'm like, I remember where I wrote every single piece. I remember exactly where I wrote it. I remember exactly what was happening. One thing that I think a lot about is like this hopelessness that sometimes we feel. For me, what's special about this book is like my primary intention wasn't for it to be read by the world. I wrote it for myself. And I think when I wrote it for myself, it was what I needed to hear. So like even in sometimes there were moments where of hopelessness that I was experiencing and feeling and like, but when I wrote, I like dropped hope into it as well, right? And like this whole idea that, there's so many things going around in the world, right? There's genocide, there's war, there's like this whole, like capitalism, fascism, like all these things that are going on. Like, also, we are like, we've had more resources than ever, but like people are lonelier than ever. There's this like lack of belonging that people feel. Like, mental health is so low, suicide rates are so high, and there's so much hopelessness, right? You turn on the news and it's just, it's tragic, and I think that like, when I write, I think that I bring the pain of this into it. Someone once was like, "Is it a political book?" And I was like, "It's not a political book, but it's about life, and life gets political, and you can't
Yeah.
run away from these things. Like, you just can't close the TV and live in a bubble. But like, at the same time, there is hope, and the hope looks different, Sometimes the hope is like, I always use the example of like, when you're experiencing like the deepest grief or so sad, like the hug of a friend just feels so much warmer.
Mhm.
And like in those moments, that's hope, right? Sometimes hope is like a sunset. Sometimes hope is like someone like making lunch for you when you're like really stressed. So it's like it doesn't mean that hope is one thing, but I feel like that's what this book, why it's important now, is like I don't shy away from the grief and the darkness. Like, I run towards it, but like find the like little pockets and strings of hope that like exist within it. Yeah, or I try to, right? And so when I write, I was
Yeah.
like, I need it for myself. I was like, oh my God, the world is so rough. What do I do? And I was like, okay, how do we find the hope? How do we find the joy? Like, joy is resistance, right? Like,
Yes.
hope is resistance. So it's
Yes.
like, how do we find that?
So, will you talk a little bit about, you mentioned this in the book, being a hyphenated identity?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that,
So
I think it's really important to be talking about this and to
yeah.
be allowing in the resonance for that.
Yeah, thank you. I actually start the book with a poem, and it's about how I grew up with like my parents, and even like identity is so complicated because
Mm-hmm.
I like um say I'm Pakistani American, right? But like my family has like all my ancestors are from India and Bangladesh, and they migrated to Pakistan. So even my like family has hyphenated identities, right? Like as refugees, as migrants, like coming to America, right? And so it's like, I think a lot about borders and how these borders create identities and how those identities create like who we think we are. And so I talk about being an air plant, and how like the dreams that my mother had for me when she immigrated to, and my father, right? But like when they came here, it was like dreams for a better life for my child that I don't even have yet, right? The sacrifices that were made before you even exist, right? And like how for generations, like self-sacrifice has like been an act of love, but like the idea that something in front of us can be even better than what was behind us. But at the same time, then I explain about how it's like, okay, well, I'm not like a brave oak or a sweet mango tree, but I'm an air plant. So like my roots feel like they're scattered. My roots feel like they're in the air. My roots feel like, and at the same time, because like home and belonging is something you're always searching for, I feel like people sometimes like in the like a lot of like third culture kids or like hyphenated people with hyphenated identities, like you're searching for like, give me a box so I can fit in. Give me a place that where the roots look just like mine. but it's not like that. So I feel like a lot of the book is also just like playing with that and kind of coming to terms with like, I'm here, this is it. And being an air plant doesn't mean that you don't have roots anywhere. It means that you have roots everywhere, right? You're I had once had someone tell me like, with skin the color of earth, you are the daughter of all lands. So like, what does that mean? What does that mean to, yeah, connect?
Let's talk a little bit about the role of the grandmothers. Obviously, the
Yeah.
grandmothers play
Yeah.
a central role in the book.
Yeah.
Uh, Share a bit about, the wisdom, the traditions, the songs that are passed down through generations and their influences on your identity.
I think like so the reason it's called Songs of My Grandmother, it's so funny because my grandmother thinks the book is a biography about her. Um and I'm not going to correct her. My grandmother, she doesn't speak English, so like it's just going to be a secret that's like, okay, this is fine. But
Mm-hmm.
the reason it's called Songs of My Grandmother is because in a lot of cultures, especially like my culture, like we don't talk about trauma. Like I don't I recently find out, like I very recently found out like how my grandmother immigrated from India to Pakistan, right? Like in the past year and a half, like during this book, right? And I think that like that story, to like ask her about it, like it was so challenging because she didn't want to talk about it, right? And like even the story that she shared, my aunt actually shared like a lot of from her memory of what happened because she was a bit older at the time. And like the whole thing is that we don't talk about trauma. Like my grandmother, there's so many stories I will never know what happened, but the places I hear the stories, or the places I kind of hear the emotions about like what actually happened, is through songs, right? Like
Mm.
I grew up as Smiley, which is like a religious minority within Islam. And in Smiley, a lot of our culture is through songs. And so we grew up singing ganans and geets that like shared stories. We also grew up like hearing ghazals and different like songs that are like people come together and sing. But the most powerful for me is one of my favorite like parts. I like love like the stereotype of the whole Indian weddings, like culturally, like we have a very long weddings, and there's a night called the pitti where a lot of like women come together, and like the women come together, and like the aunties and the grandmas and the nannies and the daddies, and they're all singing, but the songs are kind of all improvised, and they like there's a tune and there's like lyrics, and if you listen to lyrics you're like, oh, this is like actually like not a generic song, it's like a very specific song. And I realized then that like, oh, these women are talking about their stories, right? It's through song. And I went to a friend's wedding in Tunisia last year, I believe, and the same thing was happening there, right? Like all the women came together and were singing, but instead of in like Urdu and Hindi and Gujarati, like my family, they were singing in Arabic and French and Tunsi. And I was like, oh my God, like we don't process grief alone. Like we're not meant to process this alone. Like a lot of people, especially grandmothers of these traditions are still alive, like they get in a circle and they like wear their brightest colors and they sing about it, and like through singing and through dancing, like that's how people process things. Like it's not that people don't process grief and trauma. Like I'm used to hearing about it, like
Right.
on a podcast, like that's just not how it is. And so I think like reflecting on that and like what it means, but also like I play on this in my book with like the songs of my grandmother,
Yeah.
but like if every time my grandmother expressed emotions, it was only through a song, then that means that every time I or we express emotions, that must also be a song.
Mm. Yeah. I myself am very interested in intergenerational trauma and looking at the way that grief is experienced and passed down. And, so there's pieces here around, the way that you do beautifully juxtapose grief and hope, as you mentioned earlier, and grief and resilience, because we're finding meaning and growth in these moments of profound loss.
Yeah. That's like I'm smiling so big because I love not I love intergenerational trauma. Like I'm like
Right.
it's like my favorite topic to talk about. but,
Yes.
but I think like with intergenerational trauma, there's also intergenerational healing, right? And with collective trauma, there's also collective healing. And we focus so much on intergenerational trauma, like I'm literally like I went back to school to study this, but
Yeah,
also like there's so much healing that can come from it too. Like even the idea of something being intergenerational, like I think that we have this pressure that like, and there's so many studies that have been done on intergenerational trauma and epigenetics and how like the trauma that your grandmother, your great grandmother, your mother experienced, like up to like X generations, like that's now coded in our DNA,
that's
right? Like
right.
actually, like there are a lot of like higher like different like heart problems and mental health problems, like are a result of this, right? Like generations of stress that have compounded. But but there's also research that shows how like as you heal, you're also like changing the codes of future like DNA, right? Which like it blew my mind because I didn't think that was possible. But like it also shows how like there's so much we must always remember where we came from, but we must not forget where we're going. And I
Hmm.
think that like if we get stuck on the intergenerational trauma, like it's we forget where we're going. And it's important I get stuck there. But like it's important like I'm like as I totally get stuck there, but it's like, yeah, we must not forget where we came from, but there's so much where we're going.
Yeah. And, you know, so the title really does emphasize songs as a metaphor for stories and how we can use storytelling and creative expression to really honor our ancestors, navigate the personal healing, and move into a new future that may have not been envisioned at one time. And there is a way that we then get to bring the people of our past into the future that we're creating.
Yeah. No, it's like exactly that. Like um there's this interview that I'm like probably my favorite interview of Oprah and Maya Angelou.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like paraphrasing this a bit, but Oprah is like Maya, like you're like the most confident woman I've ever met. When you walk into a room, like everyone just stares at you. Like, did you know you're like the most like confident woman I've ever met? And Maya Angelou's yes, like, yes, I do. And
Mm-hmm.
Oprah's like how? And she's like, because when I walk in a room, it's not just me walking into a room.
Right.
It's like 100 people, like all my ancestors and anyone I've ever met who's walking into a room. And like when that many people walk into a room, like how could everyone not stop and stare at you? And that's why I feel like this book is like, it's not just me, right? There are
Yeah.
like hundreds of people who are
Right.
like in this book in different ways, like touching this book or like stories within it or like the advice that people have given me. Like it's not just me, like this book isn't like it's a collection of everyone I've met and everyone I know.
Mm. So you mentioned the piece about colors, and I
Hmm.
want to talk a little bit more. You were really, it's like colors as emotional symbols. The,
Right.
you know, that's the way the book is structured, representing different emotions. And this is a very singular, and I would say even now signature framework for you. And I'm curious for you to share a bit about how the colors enhance the storytelling for you.
Yeah, I think that for me, like what the colors meant is like organizing this book, as Nancy, like I found it very challenging because I was like, well, it's not chronological, it's not on theme. Like truly the themes range from like everything from like eating eggs on a Sunday to like genocide, right? Like it's like such a big range. And so it's like, how can I how can I divide this, right? And I think the what I write about or what I lean towards is like the emotions that things evoke. And so kind of thinking about that, I thought about the colors. And I noticed that in my writing, a lot of colors came up. And a lot of times I would mention colors and they were associated with different feelings without even realizing it. Like I would and there's a bit of magical realism in it at times, right? Like I'm like crying, but then the tears are purple. And so it's like, oh, okay, like maybe purple is grief, right? Or like rage felt more red or loneliness felt kind of blue. And so I played with these colors a bit, but the interesting thing about the process in itself is that every feeling has a little bit of other feelings in it. No feeling is just one color. So also like even the process of dividing these into chapters, like every piece can really go anywhere, just because like everything has all the emotions in it. But the fun part was that there were some longer pieces I'd written initially, and maybe the piece started kind of with more grief, and then it went to like loneliness, and then it went through joy, and then it went through change, and then it had hope. And I made the choice to like cut the piece into 5 different pieces and spread them across the different chapters. So like maybe if you're really paying attention, you know it's the same story, but or you take it as it is and you just read it by the emotions coming up. And so it's kind of to like I love reframing the way we think about things, and like even the colors, like I may think of some colors this way and you may think of it differently, and it's like amazing. Like please think of things differently. Like please push back on things, like the fact that you're even questioning how you think about things, like that's the goal. And so I think like that whole thing was to frame like how even if things feel dark, which like right now in the world so many things feel dark, like there's still color. Like, how can you live a more colorful life instead of just living in pastels or like choosing to live in gray? So like it's kind of like every emotion, no matter how dark it is still colorful.
And I must say, to that point, also, I think that the cover of the book is exquisite. And the color and the richness and the sort of the texture, and it's just like feels velvety and yummy and inviting and warm colors. And so I always love when I get to see a book that looks like how I want it to look.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, I like didn't design it. I had like the Hay
Yeah.
House publishing
Yeah,
team
of
designed it, but they did
course.
such
Of
a great
course.
job. Because I was
Beautiful.
like, it feels warm, I
Yeah.
wanted something
Yeah.
to feel like warm tea
Yeah.
or
That
like cozy blanket.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, of course. So, I want to sort of tap into these pieces around, uh, the power of community first. There are moments of collective healing described in the book, singing together, dancing together, like you're sharing. How do you see community rituals support individual and collective healing?
Ooh. Oh, I think it's everything.
Yeah.
I think that like one of the biggest challenges that we have in the world right now is this isolation, whether in like from oneself or from one's community, or feelings of isolation with one's country, like just ranges. But I think community is the center of it. So many people are searching for it. And in today's world, sometimes we, especially like in the US and UK, like we put so much emphasis on like a romantic partner and them being everything. So much pressure for one person. But also we weren't meant to live that way. Like it's like I've learned everything I know about love from my female friendships, and I like was going through a breakup. My friend took a day off work. Like, like that's like all to say that like, and community is something that I feel like people use that buzzword and they throw it around a lot. And I think what a lot of people have when they feel like, oh, there are people I know and I think I have community, but it doesn't feel like it, is like someone once told me that a network is when you have your mask on, and a community is when you can take your mask off. Um,
I've never heard that before. I love that.
and a lot of people may have like a big network, right? Or like social media or a lot of followers, but that doesn't mean you have a community. Like
That's right.
and it's not like taking someone's mask off. Like that may look different for you than it looks for me. I can think you're being totally yourself, but like if you do not feel like you can take your mask off and feel safe doing so and feel held doing so, then like maybe that's not your community, right?
Mhm.
And like when you can take your mask off, when you can feel safe and you can feel held and you can like in that vulnerability find like belonging in it, it doesn't become about you anymore. It becomes about something bigger than you. Like it's like this, there's a quote I love by this indigenous activist named Leela Watson that's if you have come to help me, then you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound in mine, then let us work together.
Mm.
And it like, yeah, it makes me so emotional every time I hear it. But this whole thing about like collective liberation, it's the collective is a community, right? And in order to have a collective liberation, that doesn't mean that like, oh, Nancy, you're having a hard day. Like, let me support you. I like, it like, it'll like, you look sad. It's like, Nancy, let me support you because I know what that sadness feels like. Even if I don't know what you're going through, I can sit with you through it. And so it's
Yeah.
not like I heal by sitting with you, like, and you heal by sitting with me. So let's just like sit together and sit with that. And we don't have to fix anything. We don't have to do anything. Just sitting there with someone with our masks off and just like looking at each other or like holding hands or just like looking at the Zoom screen. Like, community doesn't have to be like 500 people. It can be two people or one person or like anywhere you can have your mask off, but where the shared like what holds you together, like the threads that kind of like hold you both together, is that you care about the us. Like the we is more important than the me.
Mm.
And when the we is more important than the me, like there's so much magic that happens. And by magic, I mean collective healing, right? And as a result, individual healing too. So I feel like community is I wish it would like the authentic community,
Yeah.
like not just like whatever that means for someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Throughout the book, you highlight feminine strength, feminine wisdom, and especially in the face of systemic challenges
Yeah.
across generations. I mean, there really is such a gorgeous weaving in this book of generations, of cultures, the global perspective on womanhood, diverse cultures, diverse backgrounds. I'd love for you to share a bit about the impact on you of sharing about these universal threads connecting women despite differences in geography and culture and generations.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me, it's a reminder.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like, more than anything, it's a reminder. And I think that, like, society, especially patriarchal societies, like, they benefit by making women smaller.
That's
You
right.
know, like, I remember Malala had said how it's like, oh, like, when half the world is silent, actually more than half the world. Oh, um, I get so like whenever I get really emotional, I start crying. So I like love crying. But Malala talks about how like the people in power benefit when half the world is silent,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And if more than half the world isn't speaking up, like who does that benefit? No, no one really. It doesn't benefit anyone. If half the men were silent, that wouldn't benefit anyone either. Like if half of anyone is silent, that doesn't benefit anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's like not only do systems benefit by making women smaller, but women are rewarded for it. It's so sad, but I see how women are rewarded for it.
Yeah.
You know, like I have seen like in my own culture and like for talking to friends from different cultures, like the more submissive and quiet you are, the more people say like, oh, like if there's a quiet kid who's not playing and sitting in the corner, it's like, wow, you've raised such a good daughter, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Or like if there's someone who always follows out what you're saying and it's like, wow, she's so obedient. Like that is so like, wow, what a respectful woman, you know? And I'm like, or like even grace, right? Like I feel like grace is such a beautiful thing to have. But if like someone like I've seen in office environments when a woman doesn't stand up for what she believes in, like, wow, like she handled that so gracefully. And that just means like no anger, no rage, no
Right.
expressing this. And like it's taken a long time for me to realize the power of anger and rage. Valerie Kaur, she talks a lot about love, but also like grief is the price we pay for love. And like if you really love something, it's going to hurt when it goes away. But that doesn't mean that the love for it goes away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the same with anger. Like the same with anger is like anger protects. She talks about how anger protects what we love.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much love that women have, and like being deprived of feeling angry for it. It's how we keep people small. It's like not just women, like with color people. So don't get angry. It's like, okay, well, what do you think that anger is protecting? That anger is protecting something that person cares about. Like that shows that this is important. Like when, like it's even in the most like non-violent movements in the world, there was so much anger. Anger is productive. Anger like moves you towards something. And I think that it's like these kinds of like, it's just a reminder with these women. It's like, I write about like how like a poem about anger, but it's like songs aren't sung by silent women. Like
Mhm.
it's not the silent women that are standing up. It's not the silent women that are like changing the world. It's not the silent women that are like changing the way the system works or fighting for what they love. It's the angry woman. It's the woman who like is maybe sad enough to share what's going on in her mind. It's a woman who speaks up. And it's like again, like women are like validated and like complimented for being small, right? And like we have to be or we wouldn't be small. If we were like bad job being small, no one would be small, but women are like awarded and complimented and given raises. Like the woman who stands up in her workplace, probably not getting a raise. Woman who sits down quietly, doesn't say anything, she's the one who gets a raise, right? So we're like rewarded for being small, but it's like it's just a reminder that like the people I talk about in the book, like the women that I look up to, are the women who are changing their communities and changing the system or changing even their family unit and gender dynamics within it. It's because they are brave enough to not be small.
Yeah, I mean, the intersection here is, of course, we disown our anger, and when we can really work with reclaiming that part of ourselves, we can harness its untapped power.
Yeah.
And especially as women, I mean, I really have spent a lot of time in the past, I don't know, few months, really focusing in on really getting that the patriarchy had to dominate us into submission because of how powerful women actually are, and that women are so much more powerful than men. I mean, we can give birth. We can do things that men will never, ever be able to do. This is why women were burned at the stake for being witches. This is why women have been, sort of pushed into submission because of the power we hold. And, I celebrate, you know, your generation who is really taking big swings and big action to make waves and to make change. And I'm here for it. And I mean, I'm doing it too, but there's something about a new generation of super powerful women who are no longer willing to sit on the sidelines, and who are willing to say, I'm here and I'm diverse and I'm multicultural and I'm multi passionate, and see me, experience me, witness me in all of my glory.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love how you said, see me, experience me in all of my glory. Because often again, women feel like they have to, not just women, but like often women like
Yeah.
have to put themselves into a box, you know? And they didn't make the rules for the box.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it's like we spend all this time and energy packaging ourselves to be palatable to everyone around us.
Yeah.
And the invitation now, I would say more than ever before, not only in my lifetime, but in time, the invitation now more than ever before is to really, step fully into the reclamation of all parts of ourselves, all of who we are, to stand in that light and to, illuminate ourselves and illuminate the path for others.
And I think like that's where community is extra important because doing that alone and
Right.
standing up and like being seen alone,
Yeah.
terrifying. Terrifying. So scary, But it's like if you have other people,
Yes.
even if like they're behind you or they're beside you or they're like cheering you on, like that changes everything.
Changes everything. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited for people to get their hands on your book, Songs of My Grandmother, on finding ourselves, each other, and the things that make us come alive. And not only to hold the book in our hands, but as we were talking before we started recording, you also got to do the audiobook. So I know that, having already read the physical manuscript, I'm looking forward to having you share your own words in my ears.
Oh, thanks,
I
Nancy.
mean it
That means a lot.
sincerely. Sincerely. So where do you want to send people? What's the best way for people to stay connected with you?
Amazing. So the book comes out on March 11th. The pre-orders are live right now. So you can buy the book and pre-order the book anywhere you get your books online, whether it's like independent bookstores, bookshop, Amazon, like wherever you get your books. And then I have an Instagram, so you can follow me at Sara Surani, just my first name and my last name. And I've been posting more of my writing and book information there.
Really a joy to have you here. I feel really honored and proud, to have been able to witness your journey and to have seen you before you even had this manuscript in your hands to now having a book. And it's really been beautiful to witness. And I'm excited for you. And I'm excited for all of us who get to experience your work in the world.
Thank you, Nancy. That means a lot. Your support means a lot.
You're so welcome. And for everyone listening, go grab her book, Songs of My Grandmother. And I'll be back here again with you next week. Bye for now.